أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. So I think what came before Dr. Moctar's lecture, this lecture will be actually complementing what came before, the historical approach or the historical assessments. So I think it's a good, it's really complementary lecture in order to assess what is lacking today in our contemporary world in terms of Islamic intellectual production. I will have this presentation in 3 parts or in 4 parts. First of all, we'll have an introduction, and then we will talk about the place of Ijtihad in the global Islamic philosophical worldview, and then we will talk about the historical decline of Ijtihad, and at the end we will end with the kind of Ijtihad that is required in our contemporary world, or creative Ijtihad. First of all, as an introduction, it is known, like Dr. Moctar also said it before, that the common definition of Ijtihad turns around the fact or making effort and endeavor in order to achieve the ruling of Sharia. استفراغ الوسع في طلب الحكم الشرعي. So this is the common, like, let's say, definition, and in itself this definition is not, if we want to assess it in the light of what we are striving to as creative Ijtihad, is not problematic, because making effort and endeavor in order to achieve the rulings of the Sharia is something that is very comprehensive, because Sharia is not only about halal or haram, is not only about law, but it's globally the way, the path that God has placed or opened in order to go back to the roots, go back to your essence as a human being in order to fulfill your mission on earth, etc. So this definition is not problematic and is useful maybe to define the kind of Ijtihad that we are looking for, but this definition was not used in this sense. And if we look at the reality of Ijtihad today, we can notice that there is a problem in the scope and in the weight of the notion. That is, that Ijtihad has been reduced to a narrow and fragmented approach to the sacred text and reality, which deprived Ijtihad from its vitality and reduced it to a reactive and passive attitude that consists in assessing particular cases of reality through particular rulings that are stipulated by the text, to judge wherever these cases are acceptable or not, are halal or haram. So this is why we think that there is a need to call for a revival of Ijtihad with a focus of what the essence of Ijtihad should be, or how we can bring back Ijtihad to its essence. And this is why we use the term creative Ijtihad, meaning taking Ijtihad out of the current passive attitude to a proactive and creative method that is able to direct our lives to the higher Islamic ideals. And so, as such, this is not this type of Ijtihad is not an innovation, but is the kind of exercise that is required by the spirit of the Islamic message itself. And this is why, as a first step, it is useful to go back to the Islamic philosophical concepts, vision of the existence and the world and the human being, etc. So, Ijtihad and the Islamic worldview. So, as it's known, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-haq, He is the truth, And he created the universe with the truth, with al-haq. And he is the one who managed this universe and all of its elements with his universal will, what the scholars call al-irada al-ilahiyya takwiniyya, the divine universal will. This will guides all the components of the universe to the fulfillment of their function. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created every element of the universe with the nature, and then he guided this element to the faithfulness to its nature, and in that sense it can achieve the function through this faithfulness it achieves the function for which it was created. And human being actually is not an exception on this rule. He also was created according to a nature, and he also was guided. He also received the guidance that will enable him to be faithful to his nature, and that will enable him to realize the function for which he was created. But there is an essential difference between human being and the other elements. That is the fact that the divine guidance that was directed to human being does not emanate only from the divine universal will, but in some of its aspects, the guidance that was directed to human being, emanates from another will. Why? That is because the fact that the human being made the choice to bear the responsibility of performing his mission by his own will. That is why that Allah addressed to him his revealed will and gave him the ability to conceive the truth in revelation and creation, and to commit to it or to reject it. So the management of the part of the guidance that the human being needs to be in harmony with the universe, because at the end of the day, the final mission of human being is to strive by his own will to be a part of this universal order, to be in harmony with this universal order. This universal order is guided by the divine will, and so it's in harmony. Each element is in harmony with itself and with the other elements. And finally, the human being, his purpose is to be part of this global and universal harmony. And the part of the guidance that human beings need to be part of this harmony, and that was not addressed by the divine universal will, the management of this part is the responsibility of human being. So his function on earth is to manage this part with his free will, and throughout, of course, the guidance that he got from revelation and from creation. And this is what is called al-khilafa, the vicegerency, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is managing everything, and a part of this management was delegated to human responsibility in order to manage a part of this universe and to strive by his own will to be part of this global harmony. And this part, of course, is related to his own inner world and to his relationship with other human beings and his environment, etc. So, thereby, the mission of human being will not be achieved by the mere fact of receiving and applying the divine guidance that was addressed to him, unlike what is guided by the divine universal will. The elements that are guided by the divine universal will, they are achieving their function by the mere fact of receiving this guidance. And this is not the fact of human being. He received the guidance, but to fulfill this function, it will not be spontaneously like the other elements. The other elements are instinctively or spontaneously fulfilling their mission, but the human being needs an effort, because a big part of this guidance is not the spontaneous guidance, but it's through revelation. And that's why, despite of the fact that revelation is providing a frame of reference that can guide human action at all levels, and that and that the universe, so we have the revelation, the divine revelated will, provides a frame of reference that can guide human action and at all levels. And we have the creation that is also containing the divine will, and that can provide him with the means in order to achieve his function. Despite that, the responsibility entrusted effort to understand the revelation and the universe and to be faithful to the truth that is behind it. So we see that he got the guidance like the other elements, but fulfilling his mission will depend essentially on his own effort to address this guidance and to understand it and to implement it. And this is actually the essential meaning of Ijtihad. Ijtihad, by virtue of human mission as vicegerents, is thus the use of reason to apprehend the truth behind revelation, universe, and human reality, to guide human perception and action to the divine will. This is the general, maybe, definition or conception that we can have of Ijtihad if we look at it in the backdrop of this Islamic existential vision. I repeat, it's the use of reason to apprehend the truth behind revelation, universe, and human reality, to guide human perception and action to the divine will. So as we indicated earlier, the function of revelation is to enable the human being to perform his mission as vicegerent. And if we look at this mission, and if we look at human reality, we can see that this function requires three elements which revelation came to help providing. So you understand that the achievement of the function of the human being will not be only through revelation. Maybe the revelation provides a framework, but actually the essential means to achieve this mission are already provided by the divine universal will. It's there in his fitra, in his inner nature. He's already aspiring to the good. He's already aspiring to the divine. He's already so by virtue of his inner nature, he's already aspiring to fulfill this mission. And also the elements of the universe, or even if we talk about the fitra, we have the spiritual fitra, which is the essence of the human being, but we have also the physical fitra. And we see, if you look at the physical fitra, the physical divine will, then we see a lot of aspects also that are there and helping human being to achieve his mission. So for example, the only fact that human being is eating in a spontaneous way by the divine universal will, and it's not a divine command to eat or not. Without this element, the human being cannot perform his mission as a human being. And the fact that human being is reproducing himself without the need of a universal will that guide him to this, etc. All of those things are essential in the fulfillment of the mission for which human being was created. And that means that the essential means in order to perform this mission are already there in the divine universal will. And so the divine revelated will is complementing the divine universal will and is providing a frame and framework to guide all of those things, to guide his will, to guide those elements that he already has from the divine, those means that he already has from the divine universal will. And so I said, if you look at the mission as vicegerent, and if you look at the human nature, whether it's the spiritual nature or the physical nature, then we see that in order to perform this mission, human being needs three essential elements for which revelation came to help providing them. And those are al-Iman, wal-Islam, wal-Ihsan. And we can find them, of course, in the known hadith Jibreel that you all know. And so the human being needs those three elements in order to perform his mission. He needs al-Iman, so he needs a certain intellectual, a right intellectual perception. He needs to know the truth, whether it's behind the revelated will or the universal will, in order to follow it, because with following this truth, he can perform, he can follow the path to perform his mission. And he needs also Islam, because actually Islam is the articulation, is the practical articulation of his right intellectual conviction. If he has a right intellectual conviction, he will act accordingly. And he needs also Ihsan, which is the spiritual dimension and which is the link between his intellectual conviction and his practical behavior. Because actually, often, we can have a right intellectual conviction, but we will not behave accordingly. Our will not be directed by that what we know intellectually, because we are in the dunya, and the dunya is trying to alienate us, trying to direct our will by submitting us to all kinds of things that will derive us from the truth. So we have a lot of elements in the dunya. We have our inner elements, we have our ego, and we have our attraction and aspiration for wealth, and etc., etc. We have problems from the dunya. We have an education. We have a certain psychological mindset that was shaped through our education and through our experience, etc. All of those things are potential elements that can derive us from following that what we know by our intelligence and submit our will, alienate us. And this is why, between brackets, Tawheed is not only to worship Allah by putting your head on the ground only for Allah, but it's to liberate yourself from all of those elements and go back to your fitrah and following what's being who you really are as a human being and not alienated by the dunya. So you need this ihsan.
Can you translate some of the Arabic words dunya?
Fitra is the inner nature, natural disposition, what the human being really is. And those, maybe we can talk about them tomorrow when we will talk about theology, but those are a set of things that actually compose the human being, make of the human being who he is. Dunya is the worldly life, the worldly stage, where the human being, as a spiritual being, is experiencing a material experience. But this material experience is not really responding to the aspirations of the human being who, as he is as a human being, because actually a human being aspires for the absolute, and this dunya only provides him temporary and limited things. And this is why in the Quran we found Allah calling dunya mata'ul ghurur. It's a misguiding pleasure, because actually it will not satisfy you as a human being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّا جَعَلْنَا مَا عَلَى الْأَرْضِ زِينَةً لَهَا لِنَبْلُوَهُمْ أَيُّهُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا وَإِنَّا لَجَاعِلُونَ مَا عَلَيْهَا صَعِيدًا جُرُزًا. We put in this world, actually it's only an embellishment. That what you see is an embellishment. But don't think that the dunya can give you the aspirations that you're looking for, because it's not that was created for the human being in his essence. And this is why his aspirations to the good, to justice, to freedom, to knowledge, etc., are unlimited. And they can only be met in a world that is unlimited. This is between brackets to talk about the fitra and the dunya, etc. But to go back to the Ijtihad, like I said, the performance of the function of the human being, to perform this function, we need those three elements that revelation came to help providing. And I said it's Iman and Ihsan, or Islam and Ihsan. And I said Ihsan, it's the link between your intellectual conviction, the intellectual surrender to the haqq, to the truth, behind revelation and behind the universe. And you need this ihsan in order to make sure that this intellectual conviction will articulate in action, because if you don't have this ihsan, you can be guided and misled by things that will make that you will not stick to this, and that you will be alienated by the dunya. So these three elements, all of them are essential in performing the mission of Khilafah. Well, all the sciences that were developed by Muslims were actually, if you look at them, serving these three components. Serving, so making sure that you have a right intellectual conviction of the truth, or that you behave accordingly, or that you have are liberating yourself from everything that can alienate you from this. So in general, the science that were developed by Muslims were serving those three components of the Islamic religion, but three sciences were an immediate articulation of them, namely al-Aqidah, that was an immediate articulation, the science of Aqidah or theology, we will talk about it tomorrow, that was an immediate articulation of this component that is al-Iman. And the fiqh, I don't call it Islamic jurisprudence or law, because it goes beyond this. It's not the right translation, but it's fiqh is fiqh, because jurisprudence in the French tradition, jurisprudence mean that actually the judge will issue a verdict, and this verdict will be jurisprudence. It means it will be used by all the judges, that in the same cases that will occur. And this has nothing to do, or a little to do, with fiqh, because fiqh is not only the juristic and legal part of ijtihad, etc. So it has little to do. And in English or Anglo-Saxon tradition, it's about the philosophy of law. And this is also not fiqh. So in my sense, in my view, jurisprudence is a wrong translation of fiqh. But for me, fiqh is fiqh because it's general. It's not only talking about law. It's talking about ethics. And the biggest part of fiqh also, actually, is not the legal part. So
you can just say Islamic, and then it will be different.
Islamic jurisprudence, yeah. Anyhow, so the articulation of the science that is, or the articulation of the component of Islam is the science that is called fiqh. And then the articulation of the component of ihsan was the science that was called tazkiyah or tasawwuf or other names. And all the other sciences, in a way or in another, were at the service of those three sciences. And this actually is a manifestation of the ontological unity of sciences according to the Islamic world vision. It means that the sciences, in an epistemological point of view, they are different, of course, and they have different scopes and different functions and different methodologies, etc. But from an ontological point of view, they are one, because they have one source, and that is the divine truth, like we said. And they have one frame of reference. They have one value system that is guiding them. And they have one objective also. And that is the objective that was actually, this is the reason why God established the truth in revelation and in the universe, is the same objective, is to guide the human conception and the human behavior towards the ethical ideas. So that means that from this point of view, all the sciences should serve one purpose, because at the end of the day, the divine truth did not manifest in revelation and in the universe only in order to direct human action to the divine will. And we can see in the Quran that actually God, if He had wanted, well, there will be no perceptible order in this universe. And actually there is no, for God, who is beyond time and beyond space and beyond any logics and beyond any law, for God there is no law in the universe. He just says kun fayakun. He makes it rain without any means of clouds or of evaporation of bukhar. So anyhow, he makes things without any means, and this is what we can find in the Quran. ألم تر إلى ربك كيف مد الظل ولو شاء لجعله ساكنا ثم جعلنا الشمس عليه دليلا. So didn't you see how your Lord is expanding the shade? And if He had wanted, well, the shade would be immobile. Wouldn't expand. It will not move. ثم جعلنا الشمس عليه دليلا. And then we made the sun as an explanation for the shade. So God is telling us that actually between shade and sun there is no relation of causality. There is no causality actually for God. There is no causality in the universe. There is no relation between shade and sun. God created shade separately from sun. And there is no causality between the two. But the causality for God, there's no causality between somebody who was shot and his death. He died because God made him die, and there's nothing to do with the fact that he was shot. But for God there is no causality, but for us there is. And the reason that there is that the divine truth will appear for us behind His creation in order to be able to capture the divine will in His creation. And this is the same for the revelation. And so at the end of the day, all the sciences are coming from this divine truth. The source is one, and the frame is one, and the reason why God put or established this truth in those elements is for us to follow the divine will, the truth, in order to direct our action to the divine ideals, to the ethical ideals. This is about Ijtihad and the Islamic general philosophical worldview of existence and human being, etc. So we can understand here where lies the human responsibility in capturing and apprehending universe and revelation in order to capture the divine will. So we can see here that Ijtihad is something that is it's a large scope, because it's not, we see here, it's not only the divine will is not only halal and haram in very particular specific issues, but it's a global sense, like we said. Now, the historical decline of Ijtihad, if we want to take this and to take Ijtihad as we can understand it from this perspective, and to compare it to the notion of Ijtihad like it ended up throughout history, then we can see that the outcome of the comparison between the ontological unity of knowledge and what it does requires in terms of Ijtihad in order to guide human conception and actual action to the ethical ideas. We said this ontological unity of knowledge, of the truth, requires from the human being an effort in order to capture it and in order to guide human action towards it. If we compare this on one hand, and what the concept of Ijtihad, which with its methodological theory and practical outcome, what it has resulted in on another hand, then we can say that this comparison, the outcome of this comparison, is a strong expression of the long crisis that Islamic thought went through. Indeed, throughout history, for several reasons, the link has been broken between the different sciences of revelation, between the sciences of the text themselves, and between the teaching of the revelation also and the reality. There is a link that has been broken between several aspects, between the Islamic sciences themselves, between the Islamic sciences and what is called the other sciences, the universal or rational sciences, between the Islamic sciences and the reality, and the Islamic teaching and the reality, etc. We can say that until a certain period of time, the Islamic sciences were to a high extent efficient as an interface between revelation and human reality. This is what Islamic sciences are about at the end of the day. An interface between the divine will, which is absolute and immutable, and the divine and the human reality, which is relative and which can evaluate, etc. So the Islamic sciences were efficient to an extent as an interface between those two things, even though the methodological and epistemological frame was not fully theorized. If you look at the Islamic sciences, the methodological frame to perform this function as an interface was not fully theorized, but there was a lot of implicit approaches and attitudes in order to realize this function. Why was it, even though it was not completely theorized, why was it efficient until a certain extent? Because a lot of factors, because the simplicity of the reality. The reality was simple and was not that complex as today in all its aspects, in its political and social and economical models, etc., etc. And also, it was, until a certain extent, largely guided by the Islamic frame of reference in a spontaneous way. I mean, it was spontaneously that behavior would occur from this vision, from this existential vision, without even the need to theorize it. Ultimately, Ijtihad was reduced to the intellectual effort in apprehending the text to deduce particular rulings in order to judge certain particular individual cases in a formal way, which will end up in accepting them or rejecting them. So this is how Ijtihad was reduced, or to what Ijtihad was reduced, is the intellectual effort to apprehend the text, to deduce specific particular rulings in order to judge specific particular cases of the reality in a formal way, just the form. And even later, like Dr. Mu'taz was saying before, in the later stage, it was not even by going back to the text in order to extract this ruling, but it was by going back to the opinions of the schools. So the opinions was the school. It was not the text anymore that was the parameter to assess this particular event in the reality, but it was now the frame of the jurisprudential, if I don't, like I said, I don't like this word, or the fiqhi corpus, the corpus of fiqh that was left by the schools. This was the frame in order to assess this particular cases of reality. And so Ijtihad and fiqh ended up in a narrow conception and were nearly addressing only individual, normative, fragmented issues, while fiqh, and also Ijtihad, as to its common definition, is supposed to address one of the three components of Islam. Like we said, the Islamic religion is composed out of the three essential components: al-Iman, wal-Islam, wal-Ihsan. And fiqh was the articulation of al-Islam. And of course, you can see that the problem here is that Islam, like we said, it's the divine will related to the human behavior, cannot be confined and reduced to only particular specific cases and to halal or haram. And here I want to quote Mohammed al-Fadl ibn Ashur, Tunisian Islamic scholar of the 20th century, who is talking about the reduction of ijtihad and about the phases of ijtihad. Because ijtihad, you know, in the beginning there was an idea of ijtihad al-mutlaq, and then it was reduced to ijtihad within the madhab, etc., etc. He is saying the suspension of absolute ijtihad and the decrease of the stages of ijtihad was before the 30th century. So he means the 20th century. Nothing but a scientific deficiency. So it was a scientific lack. So he says ijtihad before the 20th century, or the suspension of absolute ijtihad. You know, absolute ijtihad is the fact that you make ijtihad not only in particular cases, but also in the general methodological frame. So the ijtihad was reduced because the ijtihad al-mutlaq was only in the first generation of scholars. So, and of course the four great schools, but others also in that period, this was ijtihad mutlaq. But then ijtihad was confined in the fact that we should stay in the frame, in the methodological frame that was established by the school. So ijtihad was reduced. And ijtihad mutlaq was not possible anymore because the schools settled the corpus, or the methodological corpus, in a complete way, and then you cannot go beyond this. And he said the fact that there was no ijtihad mutlaq anymore until the 20th century, and the fact that ijtihad was reduced, this was only a scientific deficiency, a scientific problem or lack. But it did not result in a social deficit. But that was the case after the 20th century. Now it was not only a scientific problem anymore, but the problem became a social problem, because there is a new world that has emerged. And with and Dr. Mu'taz referred to this, with this set of methodological corpus, we cannot address this new world. So before, you know, the centuries looked like each other, even though, like even Ibn Rushd in his comment on Al-Ghazali in his book Al-Daruri fi Usul al-Fiqh, he says about ijtihad, is it possible to have taqleed and to not have ijtihad anymore? He says actually either we do taqleed. There's two options, he says. Either we do taqleed, or either we don't have any mujtahid. And then there's a problem because we cannot be faithful to our religion. Or either we do taqleed, and then we use analogy on the opinions of the old scholars. And this is not possible. We cannot do an analogy on opinions. So the only way is to have al-mujtahid. This is what Ibn Rushd has said. So I mean, in that time it was not that problematic, because the periods were looking at like each other. And you know, Al-Juwayni, he said actually today it's impossible to imagine that a new case will occur that was not talked about by the old scholars. Even though, like I said, Ibn Rushd doesn't agree, because for Ibn Rushd, even it's a new issue that occurred, and it's looking like an issue that was stipulated or that was addressed by the old scholars. It's not the same. It's not the same because it's a new issue. Maybe there is it's in a new context. So you cannot use qiyas of the old opinions. So you see, even Juwayni, for him, the reality cannot evolve in a way that we have new issues that were not addressed by the old scholars. So we can see here that the periods were looking like each other and was close to each other. So this is why Ibn Ashur says here that the fact that there was no ijtihad in that period is not that problematic. It's a scientific deficiency, but it's not that problematic. But today he says it's a social deficit, because you have a new world that emerged and we cannot address it with the corpus, the methodological corpus we have at our disposal. So the purpose of fiqh is to direct human action to the divine will, while fiqh, like it ended up in the best cases, is an assessment of particular issues according to what is stipulated in specific texts. Or, so here, the fiqh, like it ended up to, is two things. First thing is we assess particular issues by throughout the text that has stipulated or that is addressing these particular issues. This is the first case. Or the assessment of particular issues that were not stipulated by specific text by giving them a similar status to cases that were stipulated by a particular text. So the first case, we have things that happen in reality, particular issues, and we have a text that are addressing them immediately. Or in the second case, we have things that happen in reality, particular cases, that were not addressed by a particular text, but we gave them the same status than other cases that were addressed by. So we do kind of it's qiyas actually, is extrapolating. We extrapolate. So what is extrapolated here is just a specific normative judgment, and not a vision, and not a view, etc. So this is in a nutshell what fiqh ended up in, and what are the problems. And I said it before, we have a lot of problems here in this narrow conception in which fiqh and ijtihad ended up in. First of all is that the divine will regarding human action does not only concern particular cases. It concern the divine will regarding human action, concern all of the aspects of life, and not only particular issues that happens. Second thing is that most of the divine will regarding human action is not directly stipulated by specific text. So how will you the divine will regarding human action is most of it is not stipulated immediately with details. It's stipulated throughout general guidance, general frame or general principles, etc. While fiqh is only looking into the particular cases and even the elements that were not stipulated. The fiqh will try to give them a judgment throughout specific cases, throughout the other specific cases, and not throughout the general frame of reference and the general principles in most of the cases. Another problem is that the divine will does not only concern human action that is, but also human action that should be. And now the fiqh, like it is, it will judge on your action, what you are doing, but it will not give you the guidance of how it should look like. And the divine will is not only concerning what you are doing, but what you should do. And this is also something that is lacking in the fiqh. And another problem is that the text is abstract and human reality is concrete. So where is the methodology? Where is the methodology in the fiqh to go from the abstract to the concrete? This is also something that is lacking, even in definition of the fiqh. And another problem is that the text has objectives, and human action, even the apparently good one, can have objective that goes against the text. So judging human action and saying it's good without looking behind it, where is it going? What is the objective? What is the general frame that is moving into? Is problematic, because the text wants if it's stipulating a ruling, it wants to go a certain direction, so we need to know what direction it will go to, etc. So we have a lot of problems in the classical conception of fiqh and of ijtihad, which is a means to produce fiqh. And so fiqh and ijtihad were reduced in a subsecond, so ba'diyya, amaliyya ba'diyya, an operation that comes after, and a subsequent operation that aims to formulate the specific rulings that are in the text, or to assess formally and partially what is happening in human reality in order to see if it's acceptable or not. With this attitude, actually, the biggest part of Islamic teachings stays suspended. The biggest part of the teaching of Islam are suspended, because we are only looking into those teachings that are talking about particular behaviors. But like I said, the biggest part of Islamic teaching is the part that is giving general guidelines, general frame, general principles. Because of the fact that ijtihad does not look into the general and abstract teaching and the practical means of the realization. Because in order to achieve this general teaching of Islam, you need to go back, like I said, to the divine universal will in the universe and in human reality to come up with the means to meet this general guiding. And this is lacking in fiqh, and this means that fiqh how it is now, it was not the case in history, like for the reasons that I said before, but fiqh like it is now, which should be an expression, an articulation of the divine will concerning human action, is only addressing a very small part of the divine will concerning human action, and the biggest part is just suspended. So the last part, what is the kind of ijtihad that is required in our contemporary world, and what is creative ijtihad, which, like I said, is not an innovation, but it's going back to how ijtihad should be. Well, I think to have an idea about how ijtihad, what is the kind of ijtihad that is required in a contemporary world, we can go back to the revelation and the attitude of the revelation. The revelation, when it came, it was, of course, an abstract, absolute, divine order, but it came and it dealt with the relative human contextualized reality. So how did the revelation deal with this human reality? What was the attitude of the revelation towards the human reality? It is very, very useful to study this in order to see which ijtihad is required. And I in a previous study, I talked about this, and I came up with 5, maybe 6, I'm still hesitating, attitudes of the revelation towards the pre-Islamic society, or towards the human reality in the period of revelation in general. So 5 attitudes. First of the attitude is the endorsement, al-iqrar, or even the borrowing of the reality. Endorse reality or borrowing from the reality. It means that some aspects of the pre-Islamic reality were endorsed by revelation, accepted and kept as they are. And we have several parts. We have ethical behavior or ethical habits that were endorsed by revelation. Because actually the things that were endorsed by revelation were the things that did not contradict the Islamic message in the form or in the objective. In the form and in the objective, they did not contradict the message of Islam, so they were endorsed. For example, we had ethical habits like al-karam, generosity, like الوفاء بالعهد, the fact that in the Arabic reality they were very faithful to their engagements, etc., etc. All of those things were encouraged and endorsed by revelation. Or we have also transactions and social habits that were endorsed by the reality or by revelation, because, like I said, they are not contradicting Islam in the form and in the objective. Like, for example, bay' al-mudaraba, certain transaction that was existing, certain elements of the marriage, etc., etc. Or we have also cultural habits that were endorsed by revelation, like, for example, the fact that the Prophet ﷺ said to the Ansar to celebrate marriages and to hit on the drums, etc. This was endorsed, and it was a cultural habit, etc. So this is the first attitude. I think here what is important also to highlight is that this endorsement of things that were existing in reality was not only and I forgot to mention one thing actually, because there's not only endorsement, but we have also cases of, like I said, and this is why I'm hesitating, is this a sixth attitude or is it in the same category? Anyhow, it doesn't make a difference, but it's also the fact that the revelation or the Islamic, let's say, frame of reference borrowed some elements from other, not only from the Arabic tradition, but from other tradition, from other civilizations, and it borrowed some elements from other civilization, and we have several examples also. Now, what is important to highlight here is that when Islam came to endorse things that were there in reality, or to borrow things from, how much? 50.
15.
Oh, okay. It was not only an endorsement without, so it was not like Malik bin Nabi says takdis, accumulating things from the reality, taking things and accumulate them, but actually it wasn't it's integrated those things into the Islamic frame of reference, and it modified them, and it put those things at the service of the Islamic frame of reference. So here, this is very important, because it's not only in the form it's halal, so we take it. No, it's actually an integration of those elements in the Islamic system, and the implementation, tawdif, implementation and the employment of those things for the ethical message. This is very important because, like it's described by Malik bin Nabi and by Al-Faruqi and a lot of other scholars, this is not what Ijtihad today is about. Ijtihad is more talfiq. Talfiq, it means that it's
copy and paste.
Yeah, it's just it's just accumulation of things that we borrow and that we take without integrating them. And this doesn't mean, Malik bin Nabi gives some examples of this. It doesn't mean that taking from the other and accumulate is bad, or that those things that we take from the other are bad in themselves. But Malik bin Nabi is comparing this to the biological rules and the biological laws, and he is saying that if you plant an organ in the human being, it biologically his body will reject it, because this organ is an corps étranger. And can you not help me? Yeah, it's a foreign part. It's not coming from the body, so it will reject it.
Alien.
Yeah, it's an alien part. Yeah, it's an alien body, and he says he says this is the same thing, is the same thing for things that we borrow from other civilization and other cultures. If we don't integrate them, and if we don't reshape them in our frame of reference, it cannot fit. It will be rejected, and it will be an accumulation of things, and not a construction of civilization. And so this is the first attitude towards the attitude of revelation towards the pre-Islamic reality. Second attitude is the rejection of the elements, the habits, the cultural elements that were contradicting the Islamic message, the Islamic view, in the form and in the objectives. And of course we have a lot of examples: the worship of idols, alcohol, etc., etc. And the third attitude is the attitude of correction. So some aspects of the pre-Islamic reality society were contradicting the Islamic values, but they were eligible for correction. They could be corrected. And so the Islam corrected them if those things were needed in those reality. There is a human need for them, or there's a need to correct them in order to achieve the Islamic ideals. And there are a lot of, to win time, we cannot give all the examples, but there are a lot of examples also. The fourth attitude is the third was correction. The second was rejection. The third was correction. The fourth is to find an alternative. Some of the things that the Islam came to reject were needed also for human reasons, in this society, or also to achieve some Islamic goals, and so the revelation came with alternatives on those things that it came to reject because they were contradicting Islam in the form and in the purpose. And we have also several examples. The last attitude is the creation or innovation, because like I said, revelation came with a frame of reference, with objectives, with principles that should be met, should be achieved according to the reality that you live in and according to the means that you have. Now, the pre-Islamic reality did not dispose or did not have all the means to achieve all the ideals or all the objectives that Islam came with. So it's not enough to say, I take this, I keep this, and I reject this. But what about those objectives that are needed or that should be realized without having any means in reality that can realize them? Well, the Islam came with the creation or the innovation of new means that did not exist in reality, because there were some Islamic objectives that needs new means that are not there in the reality to be achieved. We can give a lot of examples, zakat, for example, and al-waqf, etc., that was needed to meet one of the ideals or one of the objectives of social solidarity, etc., etc. And of course, all of those steps also were not only, like when we talked about correction, it's not only about, and this is what the reality is today. If we look at Ijtihad today and the fiqh today, when you look at the things that the Ijtihad is correcting today, it's a correction through the fiqhi parameters. When I say fiqh as it was reduced to the parameters of the وجود الأسباب والشروط وانتفاء الموانع, etc. So this fiqhi paradigm where we assess the reality in order to accept it or reject it or maybe correct it. But this correction is a correction through that is done through, like I said, through normative fiqhi parameters and not through the a comprehensive and overall Islamic view. And Dr. Tariq Ramadan in his book is talking about Islamic finance, or what is called Islamic finance, Islamic banking. And this is actually a good example of this correction through narrow fiqhi parameters, and not the correction through this overall view and overall vision. So to end, of course, there are a lot of other points, but we can have them later. So what is creative ijtihad? This was the question that is the subject of this presentation. Well, I would say it is an ijtihad that is striving to place the reality at the service of ethics, first of all. It means that when I go back to reality, my purpose is not to assess reality only, and when I accept parts of the reality, I accept it because it's not haram. But when I take this part, I reshape it and make it serve the ethical goals. And this is totally different. If you go back to reality, say, okay, halal, but you don't even look at what's around, in which paradigm it's evaluating. Then you can say it's halal, but without looking, like I said, because the human reality has objectives that may go against the ethical objectives. But here, I take reality in order to use it. If I say halal, or if I take it, I use it to achieve the ethical ideals. And also an ijtihad that is striving, like I said, to create the missing means to achieve the ethical ideals, because the point is we have a frame, but the point is to meet our ethical ideals. And only adapting to reality will not give us the means to achieve our ethical ideals. And so here we need to achieve those means. And here, if we look at ijtihad in this way, creative ijtihad, then we can see that everybody will be integrated in this operation, because the one that manage the means of the reality is not the Islamic scholars. It's everybody who is in the reality and who is working in all the disciplines, and he can know what is in his field, and he can know what means can be provided and to help achieve these ideals. And the Islamic scholars can help in order to draw the frame, formulate the frame, and can collaborate in order to help providing the means and direct reality to the ethical. Allahu a'lam wa ahkam, wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. About the issue of innovation in Arabic, I talked about al-ibtikar. It's the creation of means that were not there in the society. And I'm talking here, like I said, the revelation came in first instance to an Arabic society, to the Jahiliyyah society. And in the Jahiliyyah society, some means were missing, were lacking, in order to achieve some purposes, some objective that Islam came with. Of course, like you mentioned, zakat, and or maybe some forms of the zakat, and maybe some forms of waqf may have exist in other societies, other civilizations. But I'm talking here about because the revelation is an absolute revelation, but it was dealing with the context, and it was by definition the Arabic context and not the other contexts. So this is what I mean. The difference between this creative attitude and the finding alternatives is that by those things that Islam rejected and came up with alternatives for, the needs was already there. In the pre-Islamic society, there was a need, and there was a practice. And so the need is still there, and Islam come with an alternative mean to the same need. While by the creative attitude, the need or the objective is established by the revelation and not by the society. And this is one of the differences. Lapidation.
Stoning.
No, stoning. No, it's not lapidation. No.
Stoning?
Yeah.
Stoning.
Stoning. I think the sister mentioned that it's not in the text. It is in the text. Of course, it is in the text. It's. Of course. Yeah, astonishment is in the text, and there is so many texts in the Sahih, Bukhari, and Muslim talking about. Yeah, but I mean in Revelation. So the Sunnah is a revelation. Sunnah is a revelation. I'm talking about the Sunnah, not the Hadith. There's a difference between Hadith and Sunnah, but Sunnah is a revelation, and it's there in the text. But now the question is how you interpret it. How you deal with it. This is another issue. But saying that it's not in the text is not right. It's there.
As I should have been specific, not in the Quran.
Yeah, not in the Quran, but it's in the Sunnah, and now there are several positions amongst the four schools. The Hanafi school is thinking that it's not a had. It's not
Prescribed punishment.
Prescribed punishment, but it's a ta'zir. It means that it's up to the decision of the authorities to apply it or not. And in that sense, it can be something that can be contextualized, because the authority in that time can maybe feel the need that it is something that is needed. And it can be contextualized if we take the opinion of the Hanafi school. So the text is there, but how you look at it, how you interpret it, this can be different. Now there was a question about the education of the mujtahid. It's a very long story, because today actually there is a crisis in the education of Islamic scholars, a big crisis that is global, and it's all the universities. And if you study Islamic studies, then you will not be trained to deal with the reality, with the contemporary reality. You will be trained according to the old concepts and the old paradigms, and in the best cases you will be able to teach somebody else what you learned, but not to deal with the reality and to go back to the text in order to apprehend the contemporary reality. And I think it's a big crisis that it's on several levels, not only on the level of the academic structures, etc., but on the level even on the substance that are taught and on the Islamic sciences, etc., etc. So I think it's a very complex question that we cannot elucidate in a few minutes.